This alien girl was abandoned by all except a human soldier who stayed beside her. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. And now, let's return to our main character. Staff Sergeant Ethan Cole stood at the edge of the evacuation zone where the air still tasted like ozone and warm metal and the ground hummed faintly under his boots as generators cooled down. The worst of the chaos had passed, not with cheers or flags but with quiet efficiency, stretchers rolling, medics counting, pilots sealing hatches. Ethan checked the readout on his wrist, battery at 40%, suit temperature steady, heart rate finally slowing. He had been told to move, to keep the line flowing, to follow the simple math of departure times and remaining seats. He did all of that. He always did. Then he saw her. She lay just beyond the painted boundary where the floodlights thinned, a small figure wrapped in a medical cloak that had lost its heat. Her skin was green like fresh leaves after rain, her long hair the same shade, tangled and still, and when she breathed it was shallow enough that the motion barely stirred the fabric. Her eyes were closed, but when a passing light brushed her face, a hint of violet flickered beneath her lids, bright even in sleep. Ethan slowed without meaning to. He told himself it was just a check, a routine sweep. The kind that saved lives because someone bothered to look twice. He knelt and listened. The sound around them softened, the machines and voices receding as if the world had decided to give them a moment. He touched the side of her neck with 2 fingers, gentle, careful. A pulse answered him, light but real. The name tag on her cloak was blank. No destination code. No triage color. The meaning was obvious to anyone who'd worn the uniform long enough. She had been sorted out by silence. Ethan glanced back toward the loading ramps where an officer spoke. In clipped tones, counting time in minutes and miles. A tall alien commander with blue-gray skin stood nearby, posture perfect, eyes calculating, the kind of gaze that turned everything into columns. The commander noticed Ethan's pause and lifted a brow. "We're clear here, Sergeant," he said calmly. "She is not scheduled." Ethan nodded because nodding was easy. He had followed orders through heat and cold, through weeks measured in miles and pounds, through nights when the only thing that mattered was the next step. He nodded, then he took off his helmet. The air felt cooler on his face, the scent sharper. He set the helmet beside her and used his gloved hands to seal the cloak better, tucking the edges so the heat would hold. He pulled a spare thermal cell from his kit, snapped it on, and watched the indicator glow amber. The commander took a step closer. "Resources are finite," he said, not unkindly. "Your presence won't change the outcome." Ethan didn't argue. He didn't explain. He sat down with his back against a crate and positioned himself so his shadow covered her face. He adjusted the light so it wouldn't glare. He counted her breaths, then counted them again. The ground vibrated as a transport lifted, the wind brushing grit across his sleeves. Minutes passed. Maybe more. Time felt different when you decided to stay. Her eyes opened. Violet met him, bright and searching, confusion giving way to something softer when she realized someone was there. He smiled because smiling cost nothing. "You're okay," he said quietly, using the tone he'd learned worked across languages. He offered his canteen, letting the rim rest near her lips. She took a careful sip, then another. Her fingers curled around his wrist, light as a question. He stayed. He watched the lights move and fade and return. He listened to the distant hum and the closer sound of breathing that grew steadier by degrees. When the commander returned, he stopped short. He looked at the soldier seated on the ground, helmet set aside, hands steady, and at the alien girl with violet eyes reflecting the stars. Ethan didn't look up right away. He didn't need to. He was exactly where he intended to be. The light shifted as another transport departed, leaving the evacuation zone quieter, almost hollow, and Ethan felt the stillness settle into his shoulders like a weight he accepted without complaint. He checked the thermal cell again, amber steady, then loosened the strap of his pack and slid it closer so he could use it as a backrest without breaking contact. The alien girl watched him with those violet eyes, alert now, reflecting the pale lamps overhead as if they were stars borrowed from somewhere kinder. She tried to speak, a soft sound forming that did not quite become words, and Ethan lifted a finger gently, a small smile returning. "Easy," he said, slow and clear. "Save your breath." He pointed to himself. "Ethan." Then he tapped the badge on his chest, the scuffed letters catching the light. She followed the motion, then raised a hand, hesitated, and rested it against her own collarbone. "Lyria," she said at last, her voice thin but steady, the syllables careful as if they had been handled too roughly before. Ethan nodded as if the name mattered because it did. He glanced toward the boundary line again, measuring distance and time the way he always did, then settled back into stillness. The commander returned with two aides and stopped several paces away, the polished floor reflecting their boots. "Sergeant Cole," the commander said, his tone measured. "We are finalizing departure. Your assignment requires your presence." Ethan did not stand. He kept his voice level. "She has a pulse, Commander. Her temperature is stabilizing. I can keep her steady until medical returns." One of the aides shifted, uneasy, but the commander remained composed. "Medical has cleared the zone," he replied. "The next wave will not prioritize." He paused when Lyria's fingers tightened around Ethan's sleeve, not in fear, but in something closer to relief. The commander noticed. His eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in reassessment. "Your species," he said quietly, "often confuses sentiment with strategy." Ethan met his gaze. "Sometimes they are the same thing." The words were not sharp. They did not need to be. The commander held the look for a long second, then glanced at the thermal cell, the sealed cloak, the soldier's bare head exposed to the cooling air. "You are reducing your own margins," he observed. "I know," Ethan said. Silence returned, broken only by the hum of distant engines and the steady rhythm of breathing beside him. Lyria shifted, wincing slightly, and Ethan adjusted the cloak again, careful not to jar her. He offered another sip of water, counted the seconds between her breaths, and found them lengthening. Somewhere beyond the lights, the sky brightened with a slow-moving glow as clouds thinned, revealing a scatter of stars. Lyria followed his gaze and smiled faintly, a fragile curve that surprised them both. "They left," she whispered, not accusing, just stating a fact. Ethan considered the right answer and chose the honest one. "They did," he said. "But I am here." The commander exhaled, a sound like a decision settling into place. "Very well," he said. "We will hold a medical shuttle on standby." He turned to leave, then stopped. "Sergeant Cole." Ethan looked up. "You may remain until relief arrives." It was not a thank you. It was permission, and that was enough. Ethan nodded once and returned his attention to Lyria, to the warmth he could give and the time he could spend, to the simple act of staying when leaving would have been easier. The stars watched, indifferent and bright, as the zone waited with them. The medical shuttle arrived without ceremony, its lights soft and precise, and Ethan felt the quiet relief settle into his bones as professionals took over with practiced calm. He did not step away. He shifted just enough to make room, answering questions in short, steady sentences, watching Lyria's face as instruments hummed and reading stabilized. Her violet eyes tracked him through it all, blinking slowly as if to make sure he did not vanish when someone else touched her wrist. When the medic nodded and said she was stable enough for transport, Ethan exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. The shuttle's interior was warmer, the air filtered and clean, and the faint scent of antiseptic replaced the ozone. Lyria was moved onto a narrow cot, strap securing her gently, and Ethan sat beside her, helmet resting between his boots, fingers laced loosely to keep them still. The commander stood at the hatch, posture unchanged, but something in his expression had softened, like a calculation updated with new variables. "Your presence has altered our schedule," he said, not accusing, simply stating fact. Ethan nodded. She needed time. The commander inclined his head, a gesture small but unmistakable. The shuttle lifted, smooth and quiet, the ground falling away as lights became patterns instead of places. Lyria closed her eyes briefly, then opened them again, searching. Ethan leaned closer so she would not have to move. "We are going somewhere safe," he said. "Doctors will help." She swallowed and nodded. "They will not send me back?" she asked, careful with each word. Ethan considered the promise implied in the question. He chose honesty that did not harm. "I will make sure they listen," he said. The shuttle docked with a medical bay that smelled like clean linen and warm circuitry, and as the doors opened, the world felt less sharp. Staff moved with quiet urgency, guiding the cot through wide corridors. Ethan matched their pace, the weight of his gear a familiar anchor. A physician with calm eyes reviewed the data and spoke gently to Lyria, explaining steps and timeframes, using pauses that invited understanding. When they asked Ethan to wait, he hesitated, then stepped back just enough to respect the boundary without leaving the doorway. Lyria reached for him, fingers brushing his sleeve, and he placed his hand where she could feel it, steady and present. "I am here," he said again, because repetition can be a kind of shelter. Hours later, the bay quieted. Lyria slept, color returning to her cheeks, her breathing deep and even. Ethan sat in a chair that was not built for armor and did not complain. The commander returned alone and stood beside him, looking through the glass. "You stayed," he said. "Yes," Ethan replied. The commander studied the sleeping figure, then the soldier's worn boots, the helmet set neatly at his feet. "Our records will reflect this," he said. "As they should." Ethan shook his head slightly. "I did not do it for records." The commander's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "I know," he said. When Ethan was finally dismissed, he did not leave the wing. He waited in the quiet, counting the seconds by the slow pulse of the lights, knowing that sometimes the most important duty was not moving forward, but holding space until someone could stand again. And when Lyria woke and looked for him, he was still there. Morning in the medical wing arrived as a change in light rather than sound, panels brightening from soft blue to a gentle white, and Ethan noticed it because he had learned to notice small shifts. He was awake before the first check, boots aligned under the chair, helmet polished by habit, the faint ache in his back a familiar companion. Lyria stirred as the light warmed the room, her violet eyes opening with less confusion this time. She looked for him, found him, and relaxed, the tension leaving her shoulders like a held breath finally released. The physician returned with a tablet and a calm smile, explaining progress in careful steps, outlining hydration goals and monitored rest, speaking as if patience were a form of medicine. Lyria listened, nodding, then glanced at Ethan when words became too technical, trusting him to translate calm into certainty. He did not translate the details. He translated the tone. "You are doing better," he said. "They are taking good care of you." She accepted that, the corners of her mouth lifting. Later, when the checks were done and the room settled, Ethan helped her sit up a little, adjusting pillows and the angle of the cot with the same care he used on equipment. She winced once and he stopped immediately, waiting for her nod before continuing. "Thank you," she said, and the words carried weight because they were earned. They talked in small pieces, about nothing urgent and everything important. Ethan told her about the way stars looked from his home when the air was clear, about the quiet hum of highways at night, about coffee that tasted better after a long shift. Lyria spoke of gardens grown under glass, of songs taught by elders who believed memory lived in melody, of a job she once had cataloging light patterns because she liked order when the world felt unpredictable. Time passed without counting. The commander visited once more, standing just inside the doorway, observing the way the room felt different when the soldier was present. "You have remained beyond requirement," he said. Ethan shrugged, a small motion. "She asked me to stay." The commander studied Lyria, then inclined his head again. "We will facilitate continued care," he said. "And access." Access meant visits. It meant questions answered. It meant a chair that stayed by the bed. When the day grew long, a nurse brought soup and set a tray within easy reach, and Ethan made sure the cup did not tip, that the spoon rested where Lyria could grasp it without strain. He did not feed her. He let her do what she could, stepping in only when she asked with her eyes. Outside the window, traffic lanes traced steady arcs of light, ships arriving and departing on schedules that did not pause for anyone. Inside, the pace was human. Lyria asked why he stayed when others left. Ethan did not search for a noble answer. "Because leaving felt wrong," he said. "And staying did not." She considered that, eyes bright, then nodded as if a puzzle piece had clicked into place. When visiting hours ended, no one told Ethan to go. He remained anyway, reading a maintenance manual he had memorized years ago, turning pages slowly so the sound would not disturb her. As evening settled, Lyria slept again, deeper this time, her breathing even. Ethan watched the rise and fall, counting without numbers, anchoring himself to the simple truth of presence. In a place built for efficiency, he offered something less measurable and more durable, and the room held it quietly, as if understanding that some recoveries begin not with treatment, but with company. The day folded into evening with the kind of quiet that made sounds feel deliberate, and Ethan noticed how the medical wing breathed differently at night, monitors dimmed, footsteps softer, voices lowered as if respect were a rule posted on the walls. Lyria woke near dusk, eyes clear, hunger gentle instead of sharp, and the nurse smiled when she asked for water on her own. Ethan watched the small victories the way he had learned to watch weather, noting direction and change. He helped her stand just a little later, not fully, only enough to test balance with support rails and steady hands nearby. She trembled, then steadied, and the look on her face was not triumph but relief, as if her body had remembered something important. "That was enough," Ethan said before pride could push her further. She nodded, grateful for the permission to stop. They sat together afterward, the chair angled so they could see the window where traffic lanes traced luminous arcs, and she asked about the patch on his sleeve, the one faded from sun and washing. He told her where he earned it, without dates or distances, because those details did not matter as much as the feeling of standing with people who trusted you. She listened, fingers tracing the edge of the blanket, then spoke of trust as something her people measured differently, as a ledger balanced by usefulness and outcome. "I did not fit," she said. Simply. Ethan did not argue with her past. He acknowledged it by staying present in her present. The commander returned with a civilian official whose manner was precise and polite, carrying documents and options, words like relocation and sponsorship spoken gently. Lyria grew still, eyes flicking to Ethan, and he met her gaze with a nod that said she could choose. When she asked for time, they agreed without pressure, surprised perhaps that a request could be honored so easily. After they left, the room felt warmer. "They listen to you," she said. "They listen to you," Ethan corrected. She smiled, considering that. Later, when the lights dimmed further and the hall quieted, Ethan brought her a small thing from his pack, a coin worn smooth from years of passing hands. "For focus," he said. "It helps some people remember where they are." She turned it over, feeling the weight, then closed her fingers around it as if it anchored her to the bed and the moment. "Will you be sent away?" she asked, not looking at him. Ethan answered carefully. "I have orders," he said. "I also have leave." She nodded, understanding the space between those statements. Sleep came easier for her that night, the kind that arrives without fear, and Ethan sat with his back straight, counting breaths, the rhythm settling his own thoughts. He considered the many times he had been told to move on, to keep pace, to trust the process, and how none of those instructions accounted for the human cost of speed. In the quiet, he realized something else had changed, something small and firm, like a knot tied properly. When the nurse checked in and saw him still there, she did not ask why. She simply adjusted the blanket and whispered thanks. Outside, ships arrived and departed on time. Inside, a soldier and an alien shared a pause long enough to matter, and the pause held. The morning brought a decision disguised as routine, a soft knock and a polite voice asking Ethan to step into the corridor, where light panels glowed evenly and the air smelled faintly of recycled ozone. The commander waited with the civilian official, both composed, both careful. "Your unit has been reassigned," the commander said. "Departure window is this afternoon." Ethan absorbed the words without reaction, the way training had taught him to receive facts. "I will arrange a handover," he replied. The civilian official nodded, already preparing language about continuity and care. Ethan returned to the room and found Lyria awake, sitting up, coin warm in her palm. She read his face before he spoke. "You are leaving," she said, not accusing, just aligning pieces. Ethan did not soften it. "I have orders," he said. "I can delay a little." "Not long." Her violet eyes held his, steady now, not fragile. "Then we will use the time," she said. They walked together later, slowly, along the edge of the ward where windows overlooked a quiet garden grown under filtered light. Lyria moved carefully, hands on the rail, Ethan a half step behind, close enough to catch, far enough to respect. She told him about the ledger again, about how worth had been calculated and recalculated until people became numbers. "You broke the ledger," she said. Ethan shook his head. "I ignored it." They shared soup at a small table, steam rising, the ordinary comfort of warmth and salt grounding them both. When the physician stopped by, progress was noted and plans outlined, and Lyria asked questions with confidence, the way someone asks when they believe answers matter. The official returned with documents, options laid out without pressure. Lyria read them slowly, then set them aside. "I will choose later," she said. "Today is for standing." In the afternoon, Ethan helped her take a longer walk, measured in yards not miles, stopping when her breathing changed, starting again when it steadied. At the far window, she rested, looking out at ships moving with purpose. "They always move," she said. "Yes," Ethan agreed. "So do we. Sometimes slower." When the call came, crisp and unavoidable, Ethan felt the old pull toward motion. He packed with efficiency, folding the small things that had become familiar. Before he left, he knelt beside Lyria and placed the coin back into her hand. "Keep it," he said. "It is yours now." She closed her fingers around it and then around his wrist, not tight, just enough. "You stayed," she said. "That changed the count." He smiled, a quiet thing. "You stood," he replied. "That did the rest." The commander watched from the doorway as Ethan took his helmet and straightened. "Sergeant Cole," he said. "Your choice has been noted." Ethan nodded. "So has yours," he answered, meaning the permission, the pause, the space. As he walked away, he did not look back until he reached the junction, where he turned and saw Lyria standing with support, eyes bright, posture sure. He raised a hand. She raised hers. The corridor carried him forward, orders and distance reclaiming their due, but something remained behind, not as loss, but as proof that staying once could echo longer than leaving ever did. The days that followed moved faster for everyone else than they did for Ethan, time compressing into schedules and briefings while his thoughts kept circling back to a quiet room with a garden view and a woman learning to stand again. His reassignment took him to a transit hub where departures were announced in calm voices and coffee steamed in paper cups, and he performed his duties with the same steady focus he always had, checking manifests, confirming routes, watching for details that mattered. When the message came, it did not arrive with urgency, only with clarity, a request routed through official channels marked priority review. Lyria had asked to speak before making a decision that would affect more than her own recovery. The words did not say need. They said request. Ethan read them twice, then once more, feeling the weight of a choice settle into place. He approached his commanding officer with the message and stated his case plainly, offering to take unpaid leave and to cover his responsibilities through a swap already arranged. The officer studied him, then the request, then the calendar. "You have a habit," she said. "I do," Ethan replied. "It is staying." Permission came with conditions and timelines, all reasonable, and Ethan accepted them without argument. He returned to the medical wing the next day, the familiar quiet welcoming him back, and Lyria looked up when he entered, surprise brightening into relief that did not need words. They spoke in the garden where filtered sunlight made patterns on the ground, and the air smelled faintly of growing things. Lyria explained what the documents had revealed, not secrets but context, how her work cataloging light patterns had been more than order for order's sake, how it preserved a record essential to her people's navigation and seasonal planning, how her absence had created a gap others could not easily fill. "They did not abandon me because I was weak," she said. "They abandoned me because I was inconvenient." Ethan listened, hands resting on the rail, nodding once when the sentence ended. "What do you want?" he asked, not what should be done. She looked toward the window where ships moved in steady arcs. "I want to go back," she said. "On terms that recognize my work and my worth." The word worth did not sound borrowed anymore. Ethan outlined the practical steps he could help with, not as leverage but as logistics, contacts he could reach, questions he could frame so they would be answered. It meant time, meetings, patience. It meant sitting in rooms where decisions were made slowly and spoken carefully. It also meant risk, the quiet kind that does not show on reports, the risk of being told no. "I will stand with you," he said, choosing the phrase deliberately. "Even if the answer is not the one you want." She met his eyes, violet steady, and nodded. The first meeting was cordial and cautious, the commander present, listening more than speaking, the civilian official translating intent into process. Lyria spoke clearly, without bitterness, laying out facts and proposals, asking for review instead of favor. When the meeting ended, nothing had been decided, and that was progress. Outside, Ethan and Lyria shared a moment of quiet, the kind that acknowledges effort without demanding outcome. "You came back," she said. "Yes," he replied. "I said I would." In a place that measured success by departures and arrivals, they measured it by something else entirely, the willingness to stand through uncertainty, together, until an answer could form. The answer arrived on a quiet afternoon, carried not by ceremony but by a change in posture around the table, the way officials leaned forward instead of back, the way pauses shortened and eyes met more often. Lyria stood without the rail for the first time during the meeting, weight balanced, shoulders square, her green hair catching the filtered light as if it had always belonged there. She spoke last, summarizing what had already been said, not adding flourish, only clarity, and when she finished the room stayed still long enough for truth to settle. The commander cleared his throat and nodded once. "Your work will be reinstated," he said. "With protections. With acknowledgement." The civilian official added conditions and timelines, careful and precise, and Lyria listened, absorbing them with a calm that had been earned. When the decision was recorded, it did not sound triumphant. It sounded correct. Outside, the garden breathed, leaves shifting gently under circulating air, and Ethan let out a breath he had been holding since the request first arrived. Lyria turned to him, violet eyes bright, and for a moment words were unnecessary. She reached into her pocket and placed the worn coin into his palm, pressing his fingers closed around it. "For focus," she said, echoing him. "So you remember where you are." Ethan smiled, the kind that lifts only one corner. "I know where I am," he replied. "Right here." The next days were filled with preparations that felt different now, lighter, purposeful. Lyria trained with therapists, walking measured distances, recording progress, laughing once when she overcorrected and had to steady herself. Ethan attended briefings and signed forms, his leave ticking down, his return looming but no longer heavy. They talked about practicalities and small hopes, about gardens and stars, about work that mattered because people mattered. On the morning of departure, the medical wing gathered quietly, staff offering nods and smiles that carried respect rather than surprise. The commander approached Ethan and held out a data card. "A record," he said. "Not of the incident. Of the choice." Ethan accepted it without comment. Lyria arrived on her own feet, steps sure, posture confident, and when she stopped in front of Ethan, she did not reach for support. "They did not abandon me," she said softly. "They forgot me." Ethan shook his head. "They forgot the count," he said. The shuttle doors opened, light spilling across the deck, and Lyria paused at the threshold, turning back once more. She did not ask him to come. She did not ask him to stay. She met his eyes and nodded, an understanding that did not require promises. Ethan raised his hand. She raised hers. The doors closed gently, and the shuttle lifted, its path joining the quiet arcs beyond the window. Ethan stood until it was gone, the coin warm in his pocket, the data card light in his hand, feeling the rare satisfaction of a story that had not needed force to turn. In a place governed by schedules and outcomes, a simple decision had reshaped the ledger, and as Ethan turned back toward his duties, he carried the proof that staying beside someone could change more than a single life. It could remind him. Entire system how to count again. Time resumed its ordinary pace after the shuttle departed, and Ethan returned to his unit with the quiet competence that had always defined him, days marked by briefings and routes and the steady work of making sure others arrived where they needed to be. He carried the coin in his pocket and the record on a data card he did not display, reminders meant for him alone. Weeks later, a message arrived routed through civilian channels, concise and precise, confirming Lyria's reinstatement and departure date from medical care, followed by a second note written in her careful hand, thanking him for staying and for teaching her that presence could be an argument stronger than any ledger. Ethan read it once, then again, and folded it into memory rather than storage. On the morning she returned to her work, the sky over the transit lanes was clear, stars pale against the growing light, and Lyria stood at a console where patterns of illumination moved in measured harmony, her fingers confident, her posture easy. She paused, glanced up at the reflection in the glass, and saw a human soldier in the crowd below, unremarkable in uniform, helmet tucked under his arm, waiting without announcement. She smiled and lifted her hand. He lifted his in return. No speeches followed, no announcements made room for applause, and that felt right. Ethan did not follow her into the room of light and numbers. He turned back to his duties, the rhythm familiar, the work honest. Months passed. Reports crossed desks and decisions hardened into policy. The commander sent a brief note acknowledging a procedural update that changed how evacuees were assessed, adding a margin for time and presence where before there had been none. Ethan read it and nodded, the smallest of acknowledgments. On a quiet evening, he found himself back at the edge of a zone not unlike the first, lights thinning toward shadow, the hum of machinery settling into background. A young medic hesitated beside a patient marked for transfer and looked to Ethan without knowing why. Ethan said nothing. He sat down. Others followed the cue, and the moment held. Somewhere far above, navigation lights traced patient arcs, and patterns recorded by careful hands guided them home. When Ethan finally rose, the patient stable, the path clear, he felt the echo of a simple truth settle in his chest, the kind that does not fade. He was not a hero. He had not broken rules or claimed victories. He had stayed when leaving would have been easier, and in doing so had reminded a system how to count what matters. Later, as he walked beneath a sky that reflected faintly in polished metal, he touched the coin through the fabric of his pocket and thought of violet eyes catching light, of green hair stirred by filtered air, of a ledger rewritten by a pause. In a galaxy measured by speed and power, he carried a quieter measure forward, the knowledge that dignity could be restored without force, that mercy could travel farther than orders, and that sometimes the most enduring change begins with a single person choosing not to move on.